Welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Beth Nevins, founder of Developa. Beth, would love to get an intro from you about what you do, who you are, and all that stuff.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. My name's Beth. I'm based in the UK. I'm founder of a people and talent consultancy called Developa.io. Not sure how much you want the backstory, but in a nutshell, my background is very deep in the talent recruiting space. I've listened, Brian, to your podcast previously where you said you turned your hand at recruitment for
I've
a
done
very
everything.
small for a very small period of time,
That's
and that
funny.
was enough for you. That was enough for you, you said. But
It's a
yeah,
hard
I
job.
turned. It is.
You
It
got to sell
is.
two people on like something, right? You're a broker of people,
You are.
and yeah, and
Yep.
so you're selling the hiring manager like, hey, you should hire this candidate, and then you're selling the candidate, hey, you should take this job. It's a
Yep.
really that's a really tough gig.
Yep. Well, and it's not just the selling side, right? You're the buyer too, because your role is to qualify. Both sides as well to make sure they fit. So, do you want to work with that client in the first place? But also, when you're buying that talent, is the candidate actually right? So it's even more complex as well than just the selling side, which is what a lot of hiring managers struggle to get their head around. But nonetheless, so started my career recruiting deeply across the full software development lifecycle. So I've always been in tech since graduating. But uniquely, when I was a recruiter on the agency side, that recruitment agency specialized in tech startups. So I was working with tech founders right from the beginning. So I'm an old granny now at this, and I've been doing it for a long time. And eventually, I got headhunted to go on the other side, on the dark side, going on the inside, where I joined my first startup. And there was literally like 10 of us, typical, pizza, going down the pub, just had this idea. And it was very exciting, believing in the founders completely. And that's where I began in the talent space, but then more organically over time, broadened my skills across the whole people strategy side as well. Then went into another startup on the fintech side, a very international, very, very different business model, amazing experience on that side too. But I think, a few things in my life then brought me to this kind of inflection, crossroads point. My age, my situation of whether I wanted to move international or not. And I'd done a lot of advisory, and my years of experience at that time was the perfect timing for me to decide to have more of a portfolio career and start Developa. And timing wise, there's a lot going on. I'm sure you've spoken many times in the podcast around the grow at all costs era, and now into much more conscious scaling for founders. That's the narrative all over the place right now. So I think there's no better time for Developa to be more on demand and be available with the experience that I've got to really help on that intentional people and talent strategy to get things right, get more out of the people, really leverage out what high performance actually really means in startups intentionally. And we do that in three ways. So the first way is coaching. So of course, like how do we foster those conditions for high performance, which is investing in coaching founders and leadership. The second is then the consulting side. So once you've set that direction, of course, and you're coaching founders on their role to role model as well as leaders in the business around high performance, you then got to reinforce that with the systems design in the company across that people experience and life cycle. So there's consulting design work that intentionally needs to fit in nicely there that I also support on. And then thirdly, we actually need the people, of course, to do the work at scale. And that's where the candidate piece comes in on the third sort of service level that we provide. And those candidates then are what I call key hires. So I obviously independent, I don't do volume recruitment, although I do work with the select partners that I trust. And that's typically across tech, product and commercial, whereby it might be a founding team member or a first in a department or a leadership hire. That will take them on the next journey at the inflection point of the stages that they're in. So that's really what we do as a company. And yes, I've been going for over a year now, and I'm still going.
Amazing. And so it sounds like in your background, you were doing kind of like core recruiting
Yeah.
at an agency, and then you made this transition to kind of this full service HR
Hmm.
consultancy. Kind of walk us through, how you did that and why you did that.
Yeah, well, before from agency, I was internal, right? I was working in startups. So already that transition was nice because there's so much you don't see when you're an agent that you see internally as well. So, I mean, that was a shock factor going in and seeing a lot more of the cultural piece. There's so much that stakeholders talk about day to day, or hiring managers rather talk about day to day, that you just miss. And that
Mm.
context is key to do your job really, really well. So, yeah, just hearing all the idiosyncrasies, everything through osmosis, like everything about how the work actually was done. Like
Mm.
I literally sat with the engineers every single day. Like I literally sat amongst them. I was the
Oh
only
wow.
non-technical person doing that. And I loved it. So you just hear everything, and
Right.
you at the end of the day, I thought I was an engineer. So that experience is you can't buy that, to be very honest, on the other side. And that prepared me then to have so much insight on and empathy for what's needed as a consultant, and do that really, really well, and not just be an advisor. There's a difference between advising and actually being able to build frameworks and build things to solve problems that founders have. Yeah, and then obviously being on the inside, understanding the needs and how much speed to execution is key. So I'd seen both sides of the coin, and then setting up Developa was quite strange because you're flexing muscles from my old school recruiter days on, classic business development, distribution strategies,
Mm.
practicing pitching skills all over again. I spent the first year, if I'm honest, working out what people were naturally gravitating to, because I built my personal brand without recognizing for so long. It became very clear over the last year then what people really wanted to, what people were
Yeah.
inbound, coming towards me, and what people were referring me on, and yada yada. So that's what last year's been more all about. Is clearly talent is what I'm most known for. So that's from years of my network and reviving that over the last year. And then the people and the coaching stuff has been something that I've really honed in on and gone on my own personal journey through my own coach over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's been a great experience to bring that now consulting.
Wow. And so what percentage of your business is the talent placement, and what percentage is the coaching?
I knew you could ask that.
I
Yeah,
always put it
so
the numbers.
there's
I'm just an analytical person like that.
it's pretty much like 80% of my business is clearly on the talent. And the
Okay.
reason for that, well, look, it's everything's, if you look at the 5 whys even, right, on root cause analysis on problems that you have, it will always go back to talent at some point.
Mm.
So particularly early stage, because lots of us need help with hiring and
Yeah.
doing great doing great interviews. So that's a lot of the root cause of the problems. So that's the first port of call, and that's the route to entry into sort of most clients on the needs there. And of course, the great part about the consulting and the coaching piece is you can stay with them because there are further needs. The coaching and the design piece becomes very important.
Yeah.
Later stage, ABC. And so forth, where talent is the unique problems that you have in a founding team, for example, and so forth. So that's, different stages require different things in the playbook, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah. And what's sort
Yeah.
of your ICP, your ideal customer profile? Like, what kind of companies do you like to work with?
Well, it's clearly tech companies. So I do get inbound from non-tech, and it's very clear that that's, not my
Mm.
expertise. So I politely, I always offer them a solution where else they can probably go, but that's definitely not me. It's seed to Series C. It would be wrong for me to be consulting in much later stages beyond that where I've not lived that. So I think that's where the authenticity comes in, and the way I make money from my failures that I've had is because I've lived that experience that the founders are going through or about to go through. So that's the stage fit. And then I think, again, ICP on the needs is a few things. Like, clearly, if you haven't got an in-house recruiter, that makes a lot of sense to use me. If you've got an in-house recruiter, but they're more mid to senior, and now you're hiring a key hire in a more senior role, it's going to make more sense that you've got a peer or a level peer that's used to hiring those types of experienced hires to help. It can be, again, you've got a people team, or there's someone that's left in a very senior position and there's this void as an interim where you can come in and design and hold fort before a chief people officer comes in and so forth. So there's lots of gaps on whether something exists or where it doesn't. The stage fit is also important. There's different problems at different stages. And the ICP, if I'm being honest, is also founder fit and qualifying the founder and what they value is also important to me. And I suppose the last bias I have is slightly, I tend to have an active interest in purpose-led companies. So I've been doing quite a bit in climate tech recently, but that's more a personal preference rather than, pure ICP. But I'll be less inclined, if I'm honest, to go into something that's making 1% step change in customer service SaaS or something like that. That's probably not like going to be like the longer term relationship or product interest I may have, if I'm honest.
So it sounds like it's mid to senior technical companies. Is it technical and non-technical roles as well?
Yeah, but on the non-technical role side, it's just more so on the commercial. So we're probably talking like heads of sale, VP of sales plus, or on the marketing senior side, as opposed to SDRs, AEs, more of the, demand gen, frontline teams. It's probably not my area, although I've obviously hired and even managed those myself in the past.
So what do startups get wrong about hiring?
Oh, how long have we got?
We have 45 more minutes.
I mean, look, there's loads they get right? Because they exist and they do really, really well. And I think
what are some things they get right? Let's start with the easy stuff. Like, startups usually get these things right, but what do they get wrong as well? Yeah.
I think most
for the founders out there, what should they know?
Well, what do they get right? I mean, first and foremost, I think a lot of founders, even if they say they don't think they're great at selling, they have that, innate passion about what they believe in, what they talk about. So they're all very strong, I think, at selling the mission and vision. And that's really like the least area I have to really focus on is how they package talking about what they do. They've pitched enough times
they
to
probably have enough
VCs.
mission and passion if they're hiring for their startup. Because I mean, there's a selection bias there at play, right? Because they probably couldn't even have raised money if they weren't passionate.
Exactly.
It's one thing we look at as investors, right? Like we're looking for a big why they're doing this. Not it's not like, oh, I thought it was a pretty good business. Like that's not enough. Because you're gonna be doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. This is gonna be like your life.
Yeah. 100%. So that's the narrative and the storytelling is usually like the least area I need to focus on. But if you think about, I've literally just come from a conversation about this now. But I think there's sometimes a lovely naivety around what we should be hiring. So sometimes there's a lot of founders that just want to be purely optimistic or opportunistic rather, and they will just hire a load of people that's just interested. They're just so happy to have people interested in their idea that all qualification can sometimes go out the window because there's this bias that an excitement that talent is even applying to their roles, and the filtering process kind of goes out that window. So it's kind of like, you're interested? Yeah, let's just hire you, like bring everyone on board. And even though I agree with Jason Lemkin, the Sastra guy, who says like, you want your pirates and your romantics and all those people that just like deeply, deeply committed and just, all want to get on board, that is fundamentally important. That has to be there. Plus the competency. So you want a degree of ability and capability there. And I think there's the balance of, I think, having a lot of conversations with founders on, their philosophies on navigating through hiring for potential versus experience. That's a common discussion that comes up. So sometimes I get a lot of founders that go, we just want high potentials. We don't want people who have been, old school from the industry we're disrupting, yada, 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 and so forth. And you have a lot of conversation on, what is the diversity mix we actually want with experience versus, first time first time in a startup, or someone with potential that it's their first time that they've, smashed it in brand or smashed it in marketing or whatever. And that's really important. And of course, I'm biased. It was my first time. Someone gave me your first shot in a startup, and I'd like to think I was successful in that. So it's really getting them to navigate through the value of all sides and their business model, because there are certain roles where that is very risky. If you've got like navigating a regulatory business, you're probably not going to have a first-time person in like a high risk or compliant sort of role and so forth. So they're all the dimensions we look at. But from an attraction point of view, I think fundamentally the thing I also find is quite a shock factor with founders is how much time they're about to spend or need to spend in recruitment. That's the first journey and discussion we have together is their role and responsibility, and how much now this becomes their number one priority in their role as a founder CEO. This is the number one skill you need to have, really. Apart from raising money, the next thing is you have to be an amazing recruiter. So a lot of time's put into that, and it's kind of a habit and a muscle that you have to keep learning and keep exercising and keep training. And then navigating what is their candidate persona and what is that. So that is going through lots of stories and lots of questions of what makes a great ABC company hire, for example. So on lots of dimensions on that, because until you know what that is, you can't really go off and start looking for it or start hunting for it. So we do a lot around that, and then understanding what their needs might be and where they might be, like where their audience is, and what the company needs are, and bring those together. And then that leads you into what's called an employer value proposition. So you start getting them to double down then on what really matters, what we're going to focus on and want to be known for versus what we're not going to do. Because that's another common mistake, is that there's just this whole conversation that just is kind of like endless excitement, which is amazing, but on all these things we have to be. And actually it's quite a relief to them, but also a light bulb moment when you go, we don't have to be all these things. Why do we have to be all these things to all these people? We're not going to hire here, are we? No. And we're not going to hire here, are we? No. So we're going here, small, and then there's only like 2 or 3 core things that we should focus on in the next like couple of years to be known for in this space. Aside from the obvious, in particularly purpose-led startups, but it's how then we, tell the world in what avenues and channels about the amazing work and the mission that they have.
Is it better for a scaling company to hire top down or bottoms up, or something in between?
What's the definition of scaling?
I don't know, like you're working with a Series A company, or maybe like a late seed company, and they're starting to think about, I don't know, say build out their engineering team or their sales team. Or we could take those one by one, and they're thinking about, okay, do I hire SDRs to go set appointments so I can get more demos first? Do I get the account exec in place first? Do I get a VP of sales that can hire everybody else first? How should a founder go about thinking about that?
I mean, this conversation is much longer, and there are arguments for and against both sides, to be honest. So I can be swayed either side on all the variables and the actual strategy and the milestones. But my default bias, how only through years of experience, though I've seen the lessons learned, I do on the side of Series A onwards to have a bit more of a top-down approach, if I'm honest by this point. It does depend as well on the strength of the founder and experience of the founder to a degree. But yeah, particularly I'd say more on the sales side, if I'm honest, because there's such an engine and systems that need to be done, which, if you've got an SDR, they don't necessarily think of the bigger system or the need to have data to feed into all these other teams and so forth to have that connectivity. That's not their job description, right? The systems, as I said, of how sales feeds into product and feeds into eng, and that triangle that's really critical from the A to B to start formulating, and that sort of flywheel of feedback between them all in intelligence. That's very hard to do with a bottom-up approach. 3 leaders around that starts making sure that system starts getting created is, in my opinion, like highly valuable.
That makes sense. And so you would want to, in most cases, it sounds like hire top down. Hire the leader that can hire the other people.
Well, I suppose the point is the roles are created. There could well be opportunity for a superstar or a multiplier that you've got that can fill some of those roles, as the inflection points come that can scale up with the company. But particularly on seed to Series A, there's quite a distinction in the profile that fits some of those stages. As I said, like the Series A and B is the first time that you may have like the systems person come into the company. I don't necessarily mean like massive data, to be honest, because they're still creating data,
right.
But the systems thinker, where the A is a seeds rather is a very strong generalist and they're evangelistic. And they may not be even the process person, let alone a systems thinker. So sometimes quite a few from seed don't necessarily scale up into those leadership roles at the sort of next inflection point, where an A hire that comes in is more likely to carry through a B round as well. So again, thinking about your 18-month horizon for every hire, in terms of, without reaching that sort of Peter principle we call, where they reach a level of, incompetence through no fault of their own.
Do you believe that, by the way, as a recruiter? Do you believe that people are sort of promoted to their level of incompetence?
Well, I've seen it happen, so I know that to be true.
I think it is actually true. I think we're all promoted to our level of incompetence, because I remember, throughout my career, as soon as I was getting comfortable in a job, and doing well at it, I'd get promoted. And then now I'm in a whole nother level of incompetence that I have to, sink or swim in.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, right? We're all kind of just working at our level of incompetence. It's really interesting to think about.
Yeah. I wonder whether that's just more a society thing as well, is that, everyone just expects that, right? No one can't just master their craft in the level that they're in and just add more value doing the same thing. There is, all the structures we create is about taking that goal away, mastery, and then moving on to the next thing. You get a house. I've got a lovely apartment. I can't help myself now, and I want a house. We always want more. So I think
venture capital that manifests as like bigger fund sizes, right? If you have a $100 million fund, it's way different from having a $10 million fund.
Yeah, exactly.
You're having to lead rounds, do more intelligent due diligence, yada yada yada, etc. So maybe this is just a condition of humanity, where we're always kind of on the edge of what's possible for us and what's possible for startups and everything.
Yeah. And I actually admire people. I think it takes a lot of self-awareness and actually a lot of confidence to say, I'm here.
Yeah.
And I'm a staying. I think
we call that a professional in place. I remember at Microsoft we have this term, because there's the go-getters, right? And they want to get their 4 out of 4 rating or 5 out of 5 rating internally. And then there's just some people who are like, no, I'm completely happy just being the senior manager of blah blah for the rest of my career. And I'm going to retire in 12 years and I have a plan and I do not want to be promoted. They're actively saying, do not promote me. I'm happy where I'm at.
Yeah. I think there are some good philosophies out there in the people space, which I actually have recommended to a client at the moment, whereby if you promote someone, or particularly in a first time people manager role, do it as a soft promotion. Have it as a trial. Give people that get out card if it's not for them, and they can
give them a few people to manage, but don't promote them. See how they like it. And that's a big problem, I think, generally with organizations. And I think Google and Microsoft have kind of solved this, which is to get more pay and more enumeration in your career. You have to have more people reporting to you, which is like a disincentive for the organization. You actually want to get more done with less people, with less resources.
100%.
But these big Fortune 500 companies, you're basically incentivizing people to have more headcount, right? Because the more headcount you have, the more money you make, and the more important you are. And it's not about the metrics anymore. It's just about headcount and politics, right?
100%. I mean, even when I was thinking back to all the times I got headhunted, if I can use that term these days, but people would headhunt me, and the main criteria of getting the job would be like, how many heads have you grown?
Right.
Like, and I was like, is that really though, like the
is that important,
outcome,
or is it about the metrics?
Is that the objective? I was going to say, is that
revenue?
Yeah.
I 10x the revenue and only 2x my headcount. Oh, that's impressive.
Yeah, exactly. So that's always, I always found that very, very strange, although times are changing. But I'm just trying to recall your, what was your last point? You said you were talking about Microsoft, and the 2 tracks. I think that's become, I don't know so much about the States, but particularly in Europe now, the 2 tracks are what we call an individual contributor versus a people manager role. And then to some degree, it being equally weighted, although I've read a lot in Google, allegedly, that actually still people management does get paid more on that track side.
Yeah.
But regardless, I think 2 paths, and arguably 3, however, really, that makes sense to your business model, is important. And I think I've had it, particularly as I'm sure in sales, it's the same in recruitment. You don't want your top billers managing people if you can help it.
And especially the technical professions in Silicon Valley and I guess Seattle, Microsoft have developed this distinguished engineer, this VP level, C level person.
Yeah.
And you can look this up. I think it's public record, right? Because they're public companies. But some of these CVP, EVPs are making, $5 or $10 million a year because they're just so good at what they do. They're just such great engineers. They're 100x engineers, and so they just deserve 100x pay.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Pretty wild. Have you ever had a candidate that you knew was perfect for a role, and the hiring manager, for whatever reason, said no, and then they regretted it, right? Like later, you're like, see, that person went and did this amazing thing at this other company, or the inverse, right? Where you're like,
So this is the really hard thing about being internal is your job as a recruiter and in HR or the people position is not to influence the decision, because ultimately they're going into said person's department, i.e. engineering versus whatever. But the expertise that you do have is to be very strong on the fit and all the reasons why. So let's start with the converse first. So like where things go wrong with a recruiter, what you build up pattern recognition is like very high EQ. So you build a skill that very few hiring managers build unless they've got years of experience, which is called active listening. And what that means is you can't go away from an interview with the general sentiment or the overview of what they say. What you're trained in this skill is the exact words that's just coming out of the person's mouth. So what will happen often in interviews is, the engineer's going, and the line manager goes, great, said all these things. I said, that one thing at the end of a glorious interview is a massive red flag. And that is the problem. And you have to explore that then. You can't let that go. You have to dig away and get into that too, because that can uncover a world of things. For example, it could be, well, they moved for that role and they just, that little bit in the end of the interview is because they wanted to be close to home. But your role is now expecting them to be in office 3 days a week and 100 miles away. So you can't just say the whole interview is great and you've just heard that last bit of information that is very telling about they may not accept the position, and all these things, or they may down the line then take the job because they're available, but 3 months in decide it wasn't for them because they just displayed a motivation for taking their previous job at the end of the interview. So you can't have this sort of confirmation bias that you heard great things and then that one thing, which happens a lot, is the red flag. So that happens quite a lot, that you have to sort of risk mitigate on in the interview. And the other side, it happens all the time. Even with VCs, they have different views to me on what candidates should go into a portfolio company. That's life. I think the hard part, I was listening to this, I think it was Jeff Bezos, the Amazon dude, obviously, was saying which is different, I think, to Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs was on about like disagreeing and commit, where Jeff was saying, no, don't disagree and commit. You have to rigorously debate and keep going.
This is on the Lex Friedman podcast.
Yeah.
That was great.
In the meeting, and that's a big lesson for me. Actually, it really made me reflect, because I will disagree and commit, and I will commit to that. But it can be painful, because that can happen quite a lot. And I'll be honest, as a woman, as the only woman, that can happen sometimes in a room. It does. These things happen in meetings and so forth. That's just the majority versus minority psychology. And that's a lesson I've learned, is to rigorously, or keep challenging with more conviction on things I know to be true.
Right.
That little bit further, because especially if you know the size of the pain, if that goes wrong for the decision they're about to walk into. Of course, there's a balance there, but there are quite you have to be careful with the "I told you so" sometimes. in these scenarios that do happen.
Well, I think what Bezos was driving at, because I did work at Amazon before I went to Microsoft, and the way it would manifest in meetings there is, if there's something about the plan that you don't like, it is your job to speak up and say something. It's kind of like the TSA, right? If you see something, say something. If you see something, say something. And then once the plan is committed, once we're done debating and we've agreed to move forward, you need to put your 100% effort into the plan, or you need to leave the company. That's the disagree and commit. So it's not just it's not disagree and sabotage. It's disagree and wholly commit to the plan. And it created a lot of great discussions. I love the Amazon culture. I'd love to talk about culture for a sec, because you place lots of different candidates at lots of different companies. How do you assess culture fit when you're screening candidates? How do you get your finger on that pulse?
This is a hotly debated topic on whether culture fit.
Some people would say that culture is all that matters, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. All that matters is the fit. Anybody can learn anything they want to learn if they're driven enough, right?
I don't know if you read The Pavilion Guy. I don't know his name. Is it Sam something or other? Anyway, he wrote, it does, but product market fit eats culture for breakfast. I love that.
Market fit eats culture for breakfast. Yeah, I love that.
But anyway,
no, I've seen this too. I've been at startups where we're winning and everything's growing and going up to the right, and everything's amazing. And I've been at startups that are failing and everything's flattening out, and we're not growing, and it changes the culture, right? So success breeds great cultures. But how do you assess that as you're looking to place candidates?
It's a strange flywheel, right? This is where, you have to get performance right and understand the business model properly, and the actual commercial strategy, what it needs to fit. Because why do people stay? The people stay because the company's performing well. And if the company's performing well, you can keep
right. They're learning new things. They're hiring more people, and success and you can hire success.
Yeah, exactly. And you can hire more people. But to your question on culture fit, so this is in the people community, at least, there's now a tendency to challenge this phrase now and talk more about values fit. And I'll admit, I can be swayed both sides depending on what day I'm on, to be honest. But today, I would say values fit is definitely what you must be assessing on. I think that's very important. But culture is about the way we do things, and culture evolves, which is why I think culture fit is also important if you understand it in the sense of stage fit and the way that we do things at that stage in time, in terms of how we operate. So it's not culture fit in do we go down the pub and how we socialize. It would be more around the stage fit of the systems and the way that we make decisions here, how meetings are run, and all those things. Because as I mentioned, you've got very low process on the culture in a seed stage, but in a Series A, you've got now more process, more systems, and that's not for everybody. just like the Series B, C, and so forth is more data informed. And you may not now be able to do everything you want to until you bring a bit of data behind it and so forth. And some people don't like making decisions without data very early on. So, right. It's not just the values fit. I've struggled to get away from only looking at values fit. We can call it something else, but I think the culture or the stage fit, is maybe a better phrase, but that to me
I remember I was talking to a recruiter.
Important.
I have a funny story here, and I'd love to hear your funny stories too. I was interviewing for a product manager role. It was like, I don't know, a decade ago at a company called Theranos. You might have heard of them.
Oh yeah.
And I'm trying to assess their culture, right? And I'm like, yeah, so tell me about what it's like to work there, and what are people doing? Do they hang out after work? And that kind of thing, right? And I remember, like, I think I'm in grad school part-time at this point. Like, so I'm in like evening grad school. I have 2 kids maybe at that point, maybe 3. And he's like, oh yeah, we work, everybody comes in at 8. We all work until, 9 or 10 at night, 6 days a week. And I was like, that's not for me. Thank you very much. Yeah. And, what's funny is if he would have said, oh, this is a great place. We, every day at 5, we go down and have a beer together, or, and we play ping pong tournaments. There could be an alternative universe where I ended up at Theranos, which is terrible. Which would have been horrible to have on my resume.
But this goes back to the EVP, the employer value prop that I was mentioning right at the start, because I just come from a client. It's really interesting where they're at this like strange tension where the people team got one idea, that's fine, and the founder's saying another thing, and it's a founder-led company. So what I spent the last few months on is just bringing everybody on this journey that it's a founder-led company. We lean into this, and we're not everything to everybody, but we have to commit as a team now to the things that we are. So for example, it's we can't go into the business model, but this is a founder that is unbelievable. Well, there's 3 of them, but the CEO I'm working with, and the drive is like US level drive, like it's amazing. And I hope they're very, very successful. In fact, they will be. But that he's very clear that this is not a 9 to 5, and they all are in the office some days till early hours, and that is on the reg. So there's no point us talking about other things in policy or other things that the people team want to do and so forth, when that's not the value prop. If you are going to ask this type of commitment from people, what are the things that are going to make more sense? Is it reward? And we've got less flexibility, but we've got high reward. What is going to level out and marry up to that type of work environment in the employer value proposition? Yeah. And we steer away then, and that's the whole point is we can't have the people team or other individuals not aligned. That's the whole point. And this happens at Series A, where it's the first time often I see like founders really starting to articulate very intentionally, of course, what matters to them. They've had a little bit of experience now. They've seen enough hires. They've had enough conversations with people, other founders, yada, yada, start to understand their business model quite deeply and what it takes and so forth. There's some tension there with the earliest hires who kind of were brought without any sort of strong strong sort of assessment against those exact things. So it wasn't really understood from the founder themselves really well. And that codification then is like the big step change then on what type of talent come in next to the next part of the journey for culture, and what they get in exchange for joining. That does go through cycles.
Yeah. How do you assess passion, right? Like, you're interviewing me for, some climate tech company. And then how do you know I'm super passionate about this?
I mean, that's a hard one.
I mean, paycheck, you got on the other side, you got this founder-led company. They're doing blah-de-blah climate tech, saving the planet, right? And they're super committed. They're all working super hard, and it's like SpaceX down there. They're up at 3 a.m. working on the rocket ship, right? How do you know I'm super passionate?
I could give you an academic answer, but the truth is it's felt. The truth is it's felt. It's a feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the truth, right? I can talk to an engineer that, may not be the most charismatic in the world, but their face lights up when they're talking about the thing they care about. And I might have an absolute clue what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But
there's
the
an
minute,
energy, right?
The minute I get on that thing, they will talk to me at length about like a latency issue or like, the minutia of TDD, versus BDD, or like all these things, or this tiny thing on this like feature debate they're having. It's kind of like what lights them up, and it can be whether they can talk at great detail about it and talk about, other people's philosophies and so forth. It's whether they like the challenge about the thing that they're interested in. I think that's also like exciting. That's quite often an indicator. For the people that are more extrovert, of course, it's, the tone of voice and the engagement and the excitement that you can see it in their face. But it's a feeling, right? For me, I can come away feeling that, that person could have probably spoken about that subject at length without a break or a coffee till Tuesday to Sunday.
That's funny.
To me it's that like, relentless interest and curiosity that I look.
You said something interesting earlier, which was US level drive. Tell me what you meant by that.
Well, I mean, a lot of so there's a few things like the content I listen to, so it's a bit strange. I don't actually, over the last few years, don't read that much on people and talent anymore. Like a lot of my ideas come from product, commercial. I've got my work crush on Jason Lemkin, the Sastra dude. He literally will put everything he says is like light bulb, so true. So I take a lot of inspiration now on culture, people and talent, a lot from the product community. Is just such amazing product leaders out there. But I think a lot of the content in the people space is very good right now in America. Like very, very good. A lot of really fantastic thought leadership, even in comp like Assemble, and there's just like the list just goes on. But there is really good thought leadership in the US. And when I say like drive, I think it's just that like there's a little bit of this politeness that we just can't say, that everyone's got to be all in like Europe. And I just see the exact like opposite sometimes when I speak to like US founders. It's like,
I've had a lot of trouble with
of course it's all in
with British managers in the US, because like in the US we're very direct and we're very like, here's what I think, and here's why I don't agree with that. And I think, and maybe you could tell me why I've had trouble. And I hope they're not listening to this podcast, but because they probably know who they are. It was like a little bit of like just cultural difference, I think. Is it easier for an American to go work for somebody in Britain, like a British manager in Britain, or is it easier for a British person, English person, UK person, to come to the US and work for a US manager? And why is that?
Interesting. I think, well, it comes down to adaptability, right? That's the quality you're looking for regardless in terms of success on both sides of the coin. So either the British manager can adapt to be successful in America, and vice versa. Can you be an adaptive leader to the culture and so that is the definition of how you're successful, right? Is the ability to adapt one way or the other. But I've seen this too, right? So I'm very direct. For a Brit, I'm very aware of that. And, I've worked in the Middle East, I've worked in different countries as well, not necessarily but of course, leading them. Very different again. So again, it's that adaptive piece. Can you adapt? And you've got to have empathy if you want to influence, if you want to get the outcomes that you need. So that's absolutely key. And value difference. There's no one's right in all of this. It's just different. But I would say I think radical candor, which is another topic, is becoming more commonplace in Europe. And I do tend to find that more like hardcore engineering cultures seem to be like more receptive to like direct challenge on a technical issue, or more challenging around that. Maybe it's because it's just maybe a bit more academic from computer science, or some of these universities that people come out of, they're used to more debate and rigorous challenge and voice. But yeah, it's strange, right? Because you still got really high psychological safety in all of these cultures that I observe. But I wonder whether encouraging more of this like directness, or really say what we see, would lead to more innovation. I always wonder this. It's a common thing I think about all the time, because in all the engagement surveys that I've participated in, I'm my little toot horn is my teams have always scored the highest on engagement, and I've been by far the most direct manager in the company. So I believe you can be really direct and have a highly engaged team.
Yeah.
The whole point of teaching people with radical candor is, if you're very direct, you have to intentionally build relationships first in order to be able to be direct, because people are able to see that the intention comes from a place of wanting people to win. And wanting them to be successful.
Right.
Where the other side is, if you've got a manager that's a very, very like high empath and quite a soft personality, they're very good at building up relationships. That's just their natural tendency. But then, of course, the hard part then is they struggle to have those difficult conversations and say what they see. So providing the direct person is very good at intentionally building the relationships first,
right,
you can have that really sweet spot in that radical candor setting.
Yeah, that makes sense. So back to culture again. What role does it play in a startup success, in your opinion, or in practice, at what you've seen?
I think it's number one, right? Because a lot of it stems from the founder. And their role modeling, and everyone loves the founder. Everything goes up to the founder, early on. So if the founder's not intentional with their own behavior and setting the tone for what they value and the ways that they want to work and so forth, I think it makes or breaks. But on the converse, I have seen very strange or interesting dynamics in teams and have still got a product out the door and done all right. But what I will say, and again goes back to my work crush on Jason Lemkin, is these things can get you to, without naming names, I've seen a startup where they've done amazing, like absolutely very, very well on the ARR, and but there are some interesting cultural dynamics at the top. And does that break at some point is the answer, right? Because what Jason Lemkin was saying, like, you can still get 10, 20, maybe 30 ARR in doing certain bad habits or certain behaviors, but at some point there's a difference between good to great. And I'm wondering, is that the cultural risk then beyond that point for that company? As that keeps going, because my point to that was there was a very autocratic culture there, a very high leadership turnover consequently, but still somehow managed to get through to a very decent ARR, even with all of that turnover at the top and engagement issues. So does that bubble burst at some point? And I think if you're in it for the long game, that's where I think culture is like super important.
Makes sense. Yeah, and it's something that, when we're looking at founders to invest in, what you're trying to picture is them on the cover of Forbes ringing the bell at the NASDAQ.
Well, that's my point.
You know
long
what I mean?
Yeah.
You got to have that like it factor of, wow, I want to work for you, right? That's kind of what I'm looking for when I invest in a founder. And there's lots of other things, of course, but it's kind of like, is the force so strong with you that people will follow you wherever you go, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's the point. Can it become like a logo in itself? Like, this company, is this a brand that people want to work for, and it's known for being. I'll tell you, I've got a friend of mine, a VP in the UK, and they unicorn company, or she's on a break right now, but that company, I know there are people from Silicon Valley, and there's few that happens to in the UK. There's people from the States moving for this business because of its name and its brand. No, she's done a great job. And that was all down to culture. Like, it wasn't even a particularly, you know, and we were very close, so we talk about this, and it wasn't the most sophisticated people strategy, but the culture was great. You know, a lot of work was done in the culture, fantastic people experience, and you know, hats off to her, fantastic job. Yeah.
Well, this was an amazing conversation. Thanks so much for coming on the pod. I could have talked to you for another hour about people issues and scaling and hiring and firing. We didn't even talk about firing, but anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, another time. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I loved it. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth.